Sir, not to impede the solemnity of this moment, but what's with the videotape?
Videotape? What videotape?
Reach the
Hey guys, it's your old buddy, the Game RetroThinker, coming to you live from the basement of the legendary Sharkade. On this week's episode, man, do I have some crazy stuff to show you. Hey, can you believe it's 1990? That's like only 10 more years till the 21st century. That's the future, man! Oh man, I got such a great show for you today. We're taking a look at that brand new system, the TurboGrafx 16, and its flagship title, Bonk's Adventure. Oh man, Bonk is totally a caveman. He just headbutts everybody. Oh, and I got this great new look at a mysterious new game from Square coming out called Final Fantasy. Oh man, it looks cool. I can't wait to show it to you. And guess what else? They totally made a part 2 of Metal Gear. Oh man, do you remember Metal Gear? It was awesome! I find it strange that even though I'm exactly the right age to have watched this and it would have been right up my alley, I have no memory of actually watching this show.
I find it kind of strange he's calling himself RetroThinker when all the games he's talking about would have been technically current for him.
Must you?
Sorry.
We've also got a new look at this new game called Railroad Tycoon that's on the computer. You totally get to run a train yard. Man, my dad's gonna be really into that one. Oh, and guess what? Mega Man 3 coming soon. I've got your details. They say in this one, Dr. Wily is like maybe a good guy. That's messed up. Can't wait to play it. Oh, and have you seen this new thing Sega's got out in Japan called a Game Gear? It's like a Game Boy, but totally in color. Oh man, I hope they bring that here because I want to play it, man. Oh, cool.
This is so different from the way gaming shows are now, even ours.
You said it, kid.
So many different games to talk about.
So much innovation happening every day. So much to look forward to. So much potential. So all you computer game fans should really check out that new game, Wing Commander. You get to fly through space, shoot spaceships. Oh man, it is so cool!
He has so much energy, so much drive, He's
happy.
Was gaming really so much different then?
Everything was different then.
Our universe rests on the uneasy border between two worlds. The world of man, ordinary and stable, and the world of games, imaginative and chaotic. Where these worlds collide, one man is called to stand for reason, maintain the balance, and destroy ignorance. He is the Game Overthinker.
RetroThinker, who were you? Where did you go? Are you still out there somewhere? Were things really as simple in your day as they seem now? For you, controversy meant some busybody complaining about Splatterhouse. Me, I've got to deal with stuff like this Red Cross mess. So, in case you've been living under a rock, the International Committee of the Red Cross, one of the oldest and most successfully maintained humanitarian organizations on the planet, recently convened a side event at their 31st annual conference in Geneva, Switzerland to discuss the influence of video games on the public perception of war and military activity in the world at large. Short version, they aren't happy. See, the ICRC is mandated under a series of international agreements collectively referred to as the Geneva Conventions to both aid the victims of war crimes and expose and/or combat the commission of war crimes themselves. What seems to concern them about video games, specifically modern video games dealing in simulations of supposedly realistic warfare like Call of Duty or Battlefield, is that many of them seem to either ignore the practical reality of the Geneva Conventions and their game design, or worse, actively reward players for actions that in reality would constitute full-blown violations. At this point, talking about it is all the ICRC is doing, though they've intimated that they may be interested in either speaking to the games industry about why shooters are made the way they are, which I'd have absolutely no problem with, or asking various world governments to take the notion of flaunting war crimes laws into account when making decisions about the regulation of the industry, which I would of course have a big problem with. The way this is being reported is that the Red Cross is trying to give rights to fictional civilian characters in video games, which is both a ridiculous idea and a complete misunderstanding or misstatement of what they're actually upset about. Their concern doesn't appear to be so much that virtual people aren't being given proper treatment, but that the entertainment medium that is by far doing the most talking about war and warfighting at the moment is actively ignoring this vital and important component of its own subject, and that perhaps this is not having a good effect on the perception of real wars in the societies where such games are popular. Now, one can agree or disagree with their negative conclusion. I'm leaning strongly towards disagree myself, but it's a valid point and a discussion worth having. If nothing else, it demands that gamers and anyone else on the other side stand back and offer up a measured, thoughtful response simply by virtue of who it comes from. See, unlike the other quote-unquote attacks on video games in recent years, this isn't coming from opportunistic political hacks like Leland Yee or the dog-murdering ass clowns at PETA, morally unredeemable guys who were fun to beat up on and hugely deserving of the pummeling the gaming community handed them. The Red Cross, to put it mildly, are the good guys. In fact, they're some of the goodest good guys on Earth, dedicated to helping people survive in some of the worst situations imaginable, and helping to ensure that even something as fundamentally brutal and unpredictable as war can be waged according to some kind of basic moral order. So obviously, gamers, a community famous for their rationality and ability to respond to criticism in an appropriate and thoughtful way, would elect to engage the Red Cross with the maturity and dignity such a storied would-be opponent is obliged. Right?
Light your torches and go!
Oh, for fuck's sake. Guys, gee, we just talked about this, come on. How many times do we have to go over this? The likelihood that a billion-dollar international industry is going to be actively censored or even further regulated for whatever deplorable shit it does or doesn't do is at this point incredibly unlikely. Nobody is going to take your toys away, and if you piss and moan like a fucking baby every goddamn time someone so much looks like they might, neither you nor the medium itself is ever going to be treated like anything but a baby. I'm getting a little sick of having to keep going back to this point like every other episode. You think I like having to be Captain Bringdown all the time? You know what this one was supposed to be about? Dizzy coming back. Did you hear about that? Yeah, Dizzy the Egg is getting a new game. Isn't that awesome? Wouldn't it have been nifty to talk about him and other lost characters and franchises? Wouldn't it have made a great thematic fit with this RetroThinker framing device? But no. Instead, this has to go and be the biggest gaming story of the moment. Ugh. You know what? I need a drink. Cut back to the framing story for a minute while I calm myself down. That's why they should totally make a new Mappy Land. I mean, Mappy was a mouse cop. How nuts is that? Don't you want to see another mouse cop game? Plus, remember how the first one was like a top-down Pac-Man style thing, and then the second was this crazy platform side-scroller? Just imagine what the next one could be. That's like evolution, man. Of course, the real big news out of Japan is that Nintendo has released a new version of the Famicom, which is what they call the entertainment system over there, called the Super Famicom. And dudes, it's 16 bits. I mean, can you guys imagine how awesome that's gonna be? 16-bit Mario, 16-bit Zelda, 16-bit Kirby, 16-bit Donkey Kong, 16-bit... Oh, man! Okay, so as I was saying, unlike other groups that have offered blanket criticisms of video games, the Red Cross is a serious organization with a respectable pedigree, and while I, and I imagine most of you, disagree with their negative assessment of games, it would be a huge mistake to simply write it off as not worthy of discussion. As I've tried to instill in you before, now that the likelihood of criticism of games leading to the banning of games is all but non-existent, it is now incumbent upon gamers to meet such criticisms with honest consideration and thoughtful debate instead of blunt force defensiveness. So, the ICRC's issue with military games seems to be that despite claims of being recreations of modern warfare, concerns for civilian casualties and the omnipresence of the Geneva Convention enforcement issues that define huge parts of actual modern wars are either gleefully flouted or completely ignored. And while they have yet to issue an official stance at the time of this recording, they appear to be of the opinion that this should have some influence either on the production, rating, or regulation of games themselves. Now, like any sensible defender of free speech and the gaming medium in general, I can't really go along with that last part, but the question of whether or not Call of Duty and its ilk selling the fantasy of heroic war-making to a civilian public that is increasingly disconnected from the realities of actual war is an interesting and complex one that is long overdue for serious consideration in our community. If I may briefly digress, once upon a time, the conception most people who weren't part of the armed forces had of war was fundamentally simple. Good guys and bad guys, heroism on our side, absolute evil on the other side, and so on. And they were both enabled and encouraged to hold this naive view by virtue of the media and government controlling just how much of the reality of war they were allowed to see, which was to say, not much. For Americans, this dynamic fundamentally transformed during the Vietnam War, when technology and changing values let reporters and news cameras report from the actual front lines. Suddenly, instead of the polished John Wayne version of sanitized dramatized heroic war, folks back home were seeing something closer to reality: bloodshed, brutality, and the troublesome moral ambiguity on both sides. It was no accident that from then on, net-positive depictions of military-style action and popular entertainment were often couched in layers of unreality like science fiction, imaginary cartoon enemies, or played so over the top you couldn't possibly take it seriously. Movies and television, for lack of a better word, grew up in regard to how they chose to depict war. Video games, having not come into their own at that point, did not. Instead, in the post-9/11 world, video games, particularly military games and the massively popular first-person shooter genre, seem to have enthusiastically picked up the task of delivering shallow, nationalistic revenge fantasies in the guise of war stories that most other mediums matured out of decades ago. Despite the hilariously earnest modern warfare designation, Call of Duty and its brethren are really only interested in modern weapons. Otherwise, they're selling precisely what pre-Vietnam pro-war propaganda movies were selling: a fantasy version of heroic war-making, right down to the overwhelming emphasis on context-free multiplayer modes where even the reason for war doesn't need to exist. Now, in and of itself, that's not really a problem. I mean, it's not a good thing that the gaming medium, with the exception of the Metal Gear series, chooses to approach the very complex topic of war in only the most shallow and meaningless way possible, granted. But if the audience desires mindless gun porn bullshit, then the audience should have mindless gun porn bullshit. That's how a free market works, after all. The problem, or rather the problem that the Red Cross seems to have, is that nothing happens in a vacuum, and while no serious person believes that video games make people kill or turn people bad or whatnot, the plain fact is that everything in a culture influences everything else in a culture, and whatever else the modern warfare games may be, their popularity doesn't say anything good about the culture that produced them, and they certainly don't seem to be contributing anything positive back into that culture either. Now just think about this for a moment. While the exact numbers are seldom available for this kind of thing, it's generally estimated that anywhere between 1 and 2 million American military personnel have been deployed to the Iraq and/or Afghanistan wars in the decade between 2001 and right now. Those are pretty big numbers, but not next to this one. 6.5 million. That's how many copies Call of Duty Modern Warfare 3 sold in its first 24 hours of release. What does that mean? Well, it means it's both easier and more fun to buy a video game than it is to qualify for military service, mainly. But it also means that more Americans will experience the so-called war on terror through the fictional prism of a first-person shooter than will have experienced it for real. Now, that's not a surprise, but is it a cause for concern? I'd say, yeah, it kind of is. While I don't want to imply any kind of callousness or unsavory motive on the developer's part, I can easily see where the Red Cross may be coming from on this. The fact that essentially all modern military games exist in a fantasy universe where the weapons, gear, and settings are real, but stuff like the Geneva Conventions that would impede the fun of war basically either are absent or deliberately cast aside, is not really encouraging, and the argument could definitely be made that their pop culture ubiquity may have contributed to the resurgence of screw the international community, there are no rules in war, destroy the enemy, bullshit nationalism in certain quarters of American politics. At the very least, it hasn't helped. Now, does that mean it should be regulated? No. Censored? No. Banned? Hell no. But it's a discussion worth having, and I can't blame the Red Cross for raising the issue. Somebody had to. Sadly, I don't know that a workable solution really exists. On the one hand, I'm tempted to say that someone should make a military shooter where, at the end of the game, you got tried for war crimes if you committed any while playing. Like, remember in Chrono Trigger how shocking it was that you actually got dragged in front of a judge for all the standard issue JRPG dicking around you'd done in town? A modern warfare version of that would be just the sucker punch that genre sorely needs. Except it would have to be in the single-player campaign, and as we all know, nobody buys Call of Duty for the single-player campaign, so I'm out of ideas on that one. What would you have done, RetroThinker? Well, wherever you are, I hope you know how lucky you were to have missed out on stuff like this.
And have you heard about, like, virtual reality? It's like these goggles that totally put you in the video game, like Tron or something. One thing is for certain, guys, the future of video games looks bright and beautiful, and I can't wait to see it. In fact, I'm not going to. Say what? That's why I'm both excited and a little sad to inform you that this has been the last episode of the game RetroThinker. See, I just can't bear the thought of having to wait around to see all these new games and gaming peripherals take shape, so I've decided to freeze myself cryogenically inside the Sharkade and awaken myself in the year 2025 so that I'll be able to play all this stuff right then. Isn't that a great plan? I mean, can you imagine how many awesome games they'll have by 2025? They could be up to like 100 bits by then, and I am not gonna wait around to see it. Ivan, did they find a body or a cryogenic chamber in those ruins?
No, sir, they didn't.
Well, goodbye everybody. It's been totally awesome being your RetroThinker. See you in 2025. Let's do this! Then it's entirely plausible that this RetroThinker was released from cryosleep when PyroThinker destroyed the building.
And he could be out there, somewhere.
By Crom. If he is, we've got to find him.
Why so urgent?
Ivan, RetroThinker is expecting to wake up in a world where video games actually built on the potential of his time, instead of...
Oh no.
He's not prepared. There's no way he can be ready to find out what's happened.